Welcome to Helping Organizations Thrive. Today, I have a great pleasure of having Elia Gourgouris on the show today. Welcome, Elia.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Elia is all the way in Denver, and I just want to tell you a little bit about who he is. He's the founder of the Happiness Center, an organization of world-leading experts in the field of positive psychology, responsible for helping thousands of individuals, both personally and professionally, to achieve happiness, success, and wellness. He's also the author of two books. One we're going to talk a bit more about. One is called 7 Keys to Navigating a Crisis, that was launched in May, and 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness. He's also a podcast host himself of the Kindness and Happiness Connection. If that wasn't enough to warrant your expertise on here, Elia. And the first question I always like to ask my guests really is almost, what do you love about what you do?
Thanks for having me on your show. Number one, I think what I love the most is the ability to help people and organizations really just go from just surviving to thriving. I was given a gift when I was 5 years old, and people say, well, how did you, become, get into this field? And the first half of my career, I was a clinical psychologist for 18 years in private practice. And the second half, I switched over to the corporate side and do leadership training and development and executive coaching and so on. My grandfather, whose name Elia I carry, said something very wise to me, and then he passed away. So it's the only thing I remember from him. When I was 5 years old, he said, my grandson, he said, if you can do something good for somebody else every day, you're going to have a rich and happy life. And in my little 5-year-old brain, that's 5-year-old, a little kid, it made a lot of sense. Like, do something good for somebody else every day, be kind, be of service, be thoughtful, and then you're going to have a great life. And that's what I've strived to do. Obviously, I'm not a perfect person, not every day, but for the most part, that's really what motivates me and gets my juices flowing, is to see individuals transform or organizations transform, broken organizations or mismanaged, and see them come together in a collaborative fashion and create those loving cultures, those happy cultures, basically, that in the end make companies not only more productive, but more profitable, and so on. So that's really what, that's my main motivation. It always has been. Money obviously is always good, and you need money to transact into, it brings you some freedom, but I'm not driven by that. I'm really driven by making a difference.
Wow, that's an incredible purpose. And it's interesting how you obviously got struck by what you told at 5 years old. And did that sort of create the sort of formative approach that you got into clinical psychology and sort of understanding behaviors and people? Was that, I don't know, how did that start?
Yeah, it really did. It started actually in middle school. My family moved to the United States from Greece when I was 11 years old. And I was kind of a shy young man, boy. But I noticed that both boys and girls used to start telling me their secrets. I used to just listen and maybe offer some, common sense advice, like nothing profound or anything. And somehow they were happier. They were like, thank you so much. And long before I knew that there was an occupation called clinical psychologist that you actually get, I didn't even know about that. It came naturally to me to help other people, to listen to them, get to know them better, and just give them some practical tools, I guess, to, and as I got older and my practice expanded and so on, in essence, I'm more of an accountability coach. I get to know you, I give you the tools, and I'm accountable, and that's it. The work is up to you. If you want to get better, I can't do the work for you. You got to do your own work, but I can hold you accountable, and that's basically the contract that I have with my clients, both corporate and individual. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously, we're still in this time of, whether you call it crisis, pandemic, there's all various references. We're still in a time of flux change that's just been continuing on every level. I know here in the UK it is still continuing everywhere else. And you wrote a book back in May, sort of all about the 7 keys to navigating a crisis. 2 months after, or 2 or 3 months after. It'd be interesting to understand, before we go into a bit more about that book, how that sort of, obviously the pandemic potentially probably kickstarted, but I don't know. But to write a book in such a short space of time feels to me very quick? Was it already
Well,
in
yeah.
birthing in you?
So on March 15th, beware the Ides of March, like Julius Caesar. I have a very strong prompting, it's like a voice from above, kind of a thing. Whether you call it the spirit of God or your own intuition or your personal inner wisdom, whatever you attribute that to.
Mm.
I said, Elia, you need to get this book out as quickly as you can to help people, because there's a tidal wave coming. Yeah, and this was in March, which in China it was there, but in the United States hadn't hit yet. And I called my best friend and writing partner, Konstantinos Apostolopoulos, which is a fine Irish name. No, I'm just kidding. He's Greek.
In fact, I've got him on the show in a couple of weeks' time, actually.
All right, so you're a fantastic guy. And I said, I'm going to start writing this book tomorrow morning. Are you in or are you out? And he goes, brother, I'm in. And we spent the next 45 days like head down.
Hold on a minute. So you'd not started the book?
No, it wasn't even. We had no plans. I had no plans to even write a book in 2020. But what happened is, as you know, all my speaking engagement, I get to speak around the world on happiness and wellness and all that stuff. Guess what happened in March? Cancel. Like everything was gone, poof, overnight. So we pivoted in some ways. And to put this into perspective, my first book, 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness, which became a #1 bestseller on Amazon, took me 3 years to write. The whole idea of getting a book out in May is just insane. And yet somehow it magically happened. I mean, we worked hard and we got it out. And honestly, initially we wrote it for individuals. The thinking was, how can we help as many people across the world, because this is truly a pandemic, navigate this crisis? What happened come in the end of June, as the economies of the world began to open up, companies and organizations and corporations start coming to us and saying, Elia or Con, we need help as our employees are coming back to work. They're traumatized from the lockdown. We basically don't know what to do, and help us to navigate this crisis. So since then, that's what both Con and I have been doing, is helping organizations and companies navigate not just this crisis. And I think it's important that this book is not just about the pandemic. No. Right now, we're facing 4 crises simultaneously. COVID-19, the mental health crisis, which since COVID began is up an astounding close to 1,000% of depression, anxiety, and stress-related symptomatology. Mind you, these were not people that had those prior to the pandemic. So these are new people. According to the UN, we're talking about over 1 billion people are struggling with this, with the peak. Then you have the economic and financial crisis. Once again, as the economies of the world shut down, hundreds of millions of people unemployed, 500 million at least underemployed, and over 2 billion people who are financially, let's say, insecure, basically not knowing where the next paycheck is going to come from. And then you add to that the racial and social strife, certainly taking place in the streets of the United States, but I think across the world too, there's a certain social upheaval, if you will.
Yes, definitely.
I know you're an expert in resilience, so I think you will relate to this, Julian. Most human beings can handle 1 or 2 crises, because we've been through other crises before in our lives. They can't do 4 at the same time, especially when there's no end in sight.
Yes.
In other words, if your prime minister, or in our case, Dr. Fauci, who's the most trusted person in America, came out and said, look, I promise you, October 31st, this pandemic is over forever. It's never coming back. You and I would be like, man, we've endured this for 6 months. We're so tired and exhausted, but I think I can go another 40 days as long as I know that it's over. The problem that we're facing is this tremendous uncertainty. Not only is this not over, but you're looking at a second wave. I know in the UK, you're looking at some scary numbers.
Yes,
and the same true for the United States and other parts of the world, and Europe in general, India, and other parts of the world. So the second wave is upon us, and it's not going to get any better. And this is coming from an optimist. I don't want people to think Elia is like the sky is falling. That's not my approach. It's never like that. I'm actually an optimist, and I believe we will overcome this. However, drugs will come, surely, which at least will keep people alive. Yeah. And the vaccines will come, hopefully in early 2021. But we're not out of the woods yet. That's all I'm saying. And people are suffering from what we like to call pandemic syndrome fatigue. People are tired. They want their lives back. They don't want to wear masks. They want their lives back, honestly. They want to go back to work and not be afraid.
Yeah,
So
and I totally agree. And I think, I know back in March when it all started, I know I was talking to a lot of people, leaders were almost saying, oh, by the summer we'll be okay. And even then I sensed, I think this is a bit bigger than that. And I mean, now, it's clearly, I mean, you can't foresee the next 12, 18 months really in terms of planning, predicting, or in trying to work that through. And I guess faced with those, four sort of almost crisis in a melting pot, which is, it is horrific. And the mental health piece, I think it's going to almost be a tsunami of that in the next sort of few months as people start to, I don't know, lose the plot potentially from all the fatigue, going back to work, not going back to work, working from home, backwards and forwards, and just feeling uncertain constantly. I guess, and obviously you've written a book which is incredible within 45 days, which is quite amazing, really. What sort of things are you talking to people about to try and help work this through? Because I'm like you, I'm an optimist. I'm fairly rooted
I'm an optimist too, actually. That's what I'm saying, but these are facts. I mean, I'm not.
I'm rooted in reality, and I look ahead and I have a sense of optimism. But I also, I guess my view on it all is we can't predict the future. So we can't spend any energy on trying to predict when, how, and all that. All we can do is control how we respond, isn't it? That's ultimately the key thing. It sounds very simple. I know it's very simple, but that is the only thing we can control is how we respond. And I guess, what sort of things are you talking to leaders, businesses, organizations that are trying to help them navigate these sort of really challenging times?
So I will tell you what the top four challenges are in companies across the globe right now. The number one is ensuring the mental and physical well-being of our employees. That comes number one. In the past, this wouldn't even make the top 10, by the way. The physical and mental well-being of employees is the number one challenge to HR organizations. Number two is maintaining employee engagement, productivity, and effectiveness. Well, obviously, that used to be number one. But you can't get to the employee productivity and effectiveness and in employee engagement if you don't take care of number one first. Their physical and mental well-being. And then the third challenge, of course, has to do with this new work from home, which has its own unique challenges, as you know. There are a lot of great things that are coming out of the pandemic because it's forcing us to improvise and to show flexibility. And then the fourth challenge is really adapting to the new normal and how do you facilitate change and shape culture within organizations. So those are the four main challenges that the companies are facing right now. Now, coming back to the book, the 7 keys to navigating a crisis, we have to start with number one, which is self-care, which addresses the mental and physical well-being of people. And what we mean by self-care is how well are you taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually during this time? As our own stress level has risen, we can't maintain the previous self-care. A simple example that I will use, personal example. Before the pandemic, I used to walk 3 times a week for an hour, miles. It was kind of a have to. I'm getting older. I need to move around. During the pandemic, now I'm walking every single day of the week, 7 days a week, regardless, because I have to raise my own level of self-care to match my own personal stress levels.
Interesting.
So what are you doing personally that you weren't doing before to take care of yourself, which means getting adequate sleep, hydrating, obviously movement, perhaps eating a little bit healthier? That's on the physical side. And then on the mental side, and one of the other keys to navigating a crisis, of course, is having a positive attitude. There's so many things out of our control. The federal, local, and state government seem to change the rules of engagement on a weekly basis. We open up the economy, we close it down. Now we're shutting it down. Then we open it up again. Another lockdown. Back and forth we go. It's like watching a tennis match. So I can't control what Boris Johnson says or President Trump or any other leader, right? What I do control, however, is what I do with that information and my attitude towards those things. And that I do have control over. I have control specifically, and that's something that Con and I talk about. There's a big difference between danger and fear.
Yeah.
So if somebody coughs in my face, in your face, without a mask, that's dangerous. That's not a political statement. That's a factual statement. Fear, on the other hand, is not our friend. I don't want to be making decisions based on fear, not as an individual or as an organization.
Mm.
And I talk specifically to, I work with senior leaders. It's natural to overreact. You know, when your car is skidding out of control, you turn the wheel the other direction.
Yes, overcompensate. Yeah,
Exactly. So for senior leaders and HR, VPs and senior HR professionals, we don't want to make decisions and put in stone processes that when you're overcorrecting because that are based on fear. That's all I'm saying. Danger, protect your employees physically and mentally and emotionally. I get that. But let's not overcorrect and destroy everything that we built in the past. There's a fine balance between those two. Don't make decisions based on fear. I guess that's the bottom line.
Yeah, because it's interesting because often it's trying to distinguish those sometimes emotions where people get excited and or anxious and fear. They're almost the sort of similar type of feelings or emotions that sort of kickstart our survival brain and start us into that mode. And it's trying to get us into that more of a thrive mindset, isn't it? Where you're a lot more, what's the word? I'm trying to think of the word, pragmatic about things. You're still cognitive of the situation and people's emotions, but there's more pragmatism as opposed to not based on fear where you're running. And I always see it as, start being more future focused, more positive rather than turning around and looking at what's going on and almost running away from things, which means you're not going to see where you're going because you're going to be back to issues and problems. So self-care is obviously high priority and even more of a high priority right now.
Right.
And I agree with you. I walk every day or run. It's interesting. I never used to. Now I do it all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's a good way. And I use in that a way of reflecting as well and just to process. And I feel that's a real good processing your brain, your mindset, getting away from these screens we keep looking at all the time.
And by the way, Julian, I would say try to do it without your phone. I'm not perfect. I take my phone sometimes and do phone calls with clients, but half the time I leave my phone at home. And when I walk outside, I like listen to the birds, like look at the blue skies and take in the wind and just get connected to nature, right?
Totally.
Disconnect from the electronics. So I think that's another part of self-care, by the way. And also, I don't really listen to news. Because news to me everything is breaking news with the ominous sound effects in the background. And the images like bombarding us. That doesn't mean my head is in the sand. I read from sources that I trusted before the pandemic, so I'm aware of what's happening. But I'm not going to expose myself to this fear mongering that's taking place, across the globe. I don't buy it. I don't buy into it. So.
No, it goes back to controlling what you put in your brain. It's like it's like eating, isn't it? You control what you eat, and you have good nutrition. Make sure you're listening to the right news, the right source. Not late at night, just before you go to bed, where you're going to start running over things, getting anxious about things, and put some context around it. And I throughout, certainly when the early days, I was limiting myself to what I listened to. It almost started to read more as opposed to the emotion.
Right.
And so I then knew what the facts were, what I needed to know, what I needed to do. And then I didn't get all into a frenzy. And even when I talk to my friends, I tried to almost keep it quite objective because it's so easy to get quite subjective in the emotion.
Right.
Interesting. You've got a whole host of seven key ways. And the interesting one I think is really interesting, actually, and I think it's quite a powerful one, is kindness. And you've put that as almost as a strategy. How is that going to help you navigate when you're in a crisis or get through a crisis?
So it's interesting you picked up on that because I've gotten the most pushback out of all the 7 keys, which really are self-care, awareness, flexibility, and adaptability, obviously preparation and initiative, and then positive attitude. And the last one is kindness. Most people have actually pushed back on that. They're like, Elia, you're asking me to help other people when I'm drowning myself. What am I, my brother's keeper? They've actually said that. These are actual words. And I'm like, no, you're not your brother's keeper. You're your sister's keeper and your neighbor's keeper and the homeless person's keeper and everybody else's keeper. Because if you're listening to the sound of our voices right now, you're probably better off than 90% of the people out there. Part of the self-care is it's just like when you get on an airplane. What do they say? If the oxygen mask drops, put first before you help somebody else.
Yeah,
so that's why self-care comes first. And then kindness is the last one. But I feel like kindness and happiness, I'm a happiness expert. I feel those two are interconnected and interrelated. happy people by nature tend to help other people just because their batteries are mostly full. On the flip side, when we perform acts of kindness and acts of service, innately it makes us feel better and makes
Mm.
us feel happier. So when you're too self-obsessed or whatever, get outside of yourself and look around, because there's somebody, it could be within the walls of your own home or
Yeah.
your community or your extended family and friends who's really struggling. And so people say, well, how can I do that with social distancing? Which, by the way, is a completely wrong term. Somebody said it early on and it stuck, and it's the wrong term. Physical distancing is
I
what.
totally agree. Yes.
Social distancing. We need more connection now than ever, because loneliness is at epidemic proportions across the globe. People are
Yeah.
lonely and isolated, and they need to connect with other people. So how can you perform an act of kindness?
And they're also being told to isolate. So it's almost become a thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but not emotionally isolate. I think that's what we have. Part of the mental health crisis we're facing.
Mm.
You know, suicide hotlines are an all-time high. The calls to suicide hotlines all time because of that.
Mm.
So not emotionally isolating, connecting even more. If you get a prompting, and the second key to navigating a crisis is listen, be aware. Just like I listened to that voice that said write a book.
Mm.
If you get a prompting, you know what? I think I need to check in with Julian. I wonder how he's doing. Don't even ask why. Just pick up the phone or get on a Zoom call and or text or get on FaceTime, whatever, and reach out. What is the worst thing that could happen? You might say to me, Elia, I'm actually doing okay. Thanks for thinking of me. That's the very worst thing that could happen. But
Exactly.
far too often, when you get a prompting like that and you reach out to somebody across the globe, sometimes they're like, man, it's amazing that you called, because I'm really struggling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I
So
totally agree. Yeah.
listen to that inner voice, listen to your intuition. I had that happen to me with somebody who's a professor, PhD, and so on in
Yeah.
Greece. And I called her out of the blue because I got that prompting. And this was early on in the pandemic. And she said to me, I haven't seen a human being, because she has asthma, for 14 days. Have you ever experienced that, where you've never not touched another human being? I haven't even talked to anybody for 14 days. It's funny that you should call me. And I made a commitment to her and to myself. I'm going to reach out to her every week until she got a little bit better.
Wow. That's brilliant.
So that's just one example. I can give you a lot more than that.
And it's interesting because kindness, it goes away from obviously clearly being self-centered, because you're focusing on somebody else's needs and you're serving, and it goes back to just like you got excited right at the very start about your passion of helping others and your purpose, and by doing that, actually, it creates all the neurotransmitters, gets you excited, you think more positive about things. And it's not that you're looking on somebody thinking, oh, they need my help, and it lowers me. You almost just forget about that. You forget about yourself because you're going to help. And it's similar to being grateful, isn't it? When you start being grateful for things, start being that. I do a daily almost thinking of what I'm grateful in the morning, in the evening, and that can be small things, and that sort of kick-starting those positive illicit states. Really, it really does that. So it's a similar sort of process going on, so neurologically, which you could probably tell me more than I know.
Yeah, and how let's translate that into the corporate world and in organizations. Before you tell them you need to work harder because we shut down for 2 months and we need to hit the numbers at the end of the month, or else, before you have that conversation, if you're a leader, and anybody that has anybody reporting them, even if it's one person, you're a leader basically. Close the door, or if it's through Zoom, however you communicate with your folks, and don't ask, how are you doing, Julia? Because most people will say, I'm fine, just because they don't want to talk about it. I say, what I do personally is, like, I close the door and I lean into the mic, like, how are you really doing? This is between you and I. Really, how are you doing? How's your family? Has anybody that you know or love has been affected by this or not? Have that personal connection conversation first before you talk about business at all. Because people are not going to care how much you know until they know how much you care about them.
Yes, totally. Yes.
Right? And now we need to practice compassion and kindness now more than ever, because people are really, really struggling.
Like, I think people
take that extra step. Because I talk to HR professionals all day long. This is what I'm sharing with them. This is what you need to be doing in your organization. Believe me, that extra 5 or 10 minutes and don't do it just to check, okay, I did my no, do it because you really care about that person.
Exactly. Yes.
And ask them don't say, how you doing? Fine, good. Okay, see ya. No, because lean in. Ask more.
No.
Dig a little deeper, and you'll discover a lot of things. Maybe they have a sick child at home, or maybe they have an elderly parent that they're concerned that they might bring, COVID to their home. And, these are real concerns. These are not fake concerns, So take the extra step. It'll be worth it in the end.
It is. It's that reality of being human and that sort of leadership that's empathetic. It's interesting you asking that question. How are you? We all do it very quickly. How are you? We go, yeah, fine. And we all move. And even on a Zoom call, I remember a HR lady she used to say, how are you? But what she used to do is, how are you today, Julian? And it did something. I don't know what it does. It just puts like a pin in you and goes, no, I'm really interested. How are you today, Elia? How are you today? And it just puts a real emphasis. And I've started to use that to people, and it stops them, and they actually do genuinely start to share more rather than going, I'm fine. It almost sort of, I don't know, cuts through the subconscious of.
And I borrowed that because I really like that. I haven't heard that before, but I think when you ask them, how are you really doing today? You're actually making it real.
Now. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that approach. I think that's a great question.
It just puts it in the now rather than just I'm fine. But yeah, no, that's great. Right. So you obviously wrote a book in 45 days, which is incredible, really. We become very resourceful in crisis, don't we? That's incredibly resourceful. And you've obviously been talking to, you've obviously got it published and talking to people a lot about this. What I presume you're getting really good response in terms of people, in terms of using this book and the sort of principles you've come out with from leaders now and HR people and organizations. What are they? How are they responding to your insights?
I think it's look. I wrote both of those books, and second one, obviously, with my partner Con. So I mean, he takes at least 50% credit, not more than that. But I wrote them from my heart, not as a PhD. I wrote them in a simple way that anybody can get something out of it. If you open up any page that you can do, they're more like how-to books. It's truly a practical guide. One of the keys to navigating a crisis that I think has resonated most with people is the one that is the flexibility one.
Yeah.
And in it we talk about, we use the analogy of the oak tree and the palm tree in essence. So the oak tree, as you know, is this massive, huge, tall, has been around for 100 years. Solid, immovable in essence. But during a hurricane, if there's enough rain and enough saturation of the ground and then enough wind, what happens to oak trees? They come crashing down on cars, people, homes, and so on. The palm tree, on the other hand, which is a much thinner, tree, bends and bends. Sometimes it bends almost parallel to the ground at the peak of the hurricane, at the peak of the storm. But when the hurricane passes, or the storms of life, if we want to use it that fast, what happens to the palm tree? It rises up again and survives, and then ends up thriving because its roots now actually have a little deeper. So we're asking organizations and people to be palm trees, not to be oak trees, meaning that if you approach a problem and say, well, that's the way we've done things around here, that's how we always do things around here, you have to forget about that. Exactly. Because what worked before the pandemic is not going to work anymore. It's not working. I mean, right? So you have to be flexible and adaptable, and be open to trying new ways to reach your customers, and trying new ways, like we talked about just now, reaching your internal customer, which are your employees. You have to do that, or else you're going to be left behind.
No, I like that, and it backs up something I heard recently where somebody said to me that don't get caught up on predicting the future, but get caught up on investing on how to be more adaptable.
Right.
Because you'll always have challenges. COVID or no COVID, there will always be challenges. And in fact, this just gives you an opportunity to be even more agile, even more flexible, and in fact, actually, you may do some things in a way that you've never done before, but actually maybe even better than before.
And it's not even maybe. I've seen people do things better now than they've done before. They're more efficient. This whole work from home, which is a whole different, we can do an entire podcast on that alone, actually. How do you actually create the workspace to be efficient and productive and healthy while you're balancing, your family or your home situation at the same time? Because that's not an easy balance, by the way, but there is a way to do it. So that's another challenge, of course.
There is a challenge. Well, we could talk through your book, and there's, as I've wrote all down the titles of it, there's loads in there. And so I guess a plug. There we go. Let's have a plug in your book. There we go. And where can people get? I presume Amazon and
Amazon, yeah, ebook or the actual hardcover.
Brilliant. And what's the best way if people want to engage with you in terms of getting hold of you?
I would probably say LinkedIn is probably the best way. I live on LinkedIn practically, or thehappinesscenter.com is my one website, or dreliagourgouris.com. That's more of my keynote speaker website. So and you'll find my happiness programs and work-life happiness programs there as well.
Brilliant. Well, I really do value you coming on today and sharing your insights from a book that was done in record time, and also providing such great sort of insights and strategies to help people, certainly right now. And as we said, this is going to continue, and we need to equip ourselves and equip our people to help get through this. So yeah, really thank you for coming on, Elia.
Can I say one last thing? You know, I used to say there's a difference between, you know, that life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. That's got a statement that I used to have. Well, guess what? This thing is not a marathon, it's an ultra marathon.
Yes.
It's true. But even in the midst of this, I will say this: do not procrastinate your happiness. Happiness now, even in the midst of this, take care of yourselves, help other people if you can along the way, and live a good life now, because clearly what the pandemic has shown to everybody is there's no guarantee we'll be here next month or tomorrow or next year. No. So live your best life and do it now. Don't wait for when the kids grow up, or when I'll retire, or when I'll get this promotion, or when. Don't wait for the wins. Live in the present and live your best life now. That's my hope and my wish for everybody.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. And I like the ultra marathon. I did one 2 years ago, an ultra marathon. Yes. So yes.
Oh, so you know then.
Yeah. My wife's about to do one at Christmas time as well. So yeah. So no, it's.
Wow, that's very impressive. I was a sprinter when I was an athlete, so I can't relate to marathon.
Well, I used to be a sprinter, but I think I got slower, so I've become a long distance running instead. Well, I say running; it's more walking than anything else, to be honest. Right. So yeah. Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.